Income tax charity checkoff funds. You've seen the funds on your state income tax forms. Breast cancer research, return a gift to wildlife. You can donate part of your return to them or 23 other causes. But we've learned again this year that so much of that money is not going anywhere. It sits untouched in state accounts, not helping anyone, and you paid for it. It's a fairly simple process. Check off a box as you're doing your state income taxes and send a donation to a worthy charity. What's not so simple is making sure that money gets to those who need it.
The money's just not getting out the doors.
State Controller Tom DiNapoli has audited these checkoff funds earmarked for many key health, social, and environmental causes, and he doesn't like what he sees.
We've been through some very tough times, so to think that money that people are voluntarily contributing for a good cause, a good purpose, is just not being utilized. Taxpayers should rightfully say, I should just contribute directly to an organization that's helping veterans rather than trust New York State to get the money out the door. That's a broken promise.
Here are the numbers. $16.5 million sitting in the 25 accounts. Just $2.7 million dispersed last fiscal year. The funds are overseen by individual state agencies, health, mental health, Veterans Affairs. So we went straight to the Lieutenant Governor, Brian Benjamin, to find out why the money isn't being doled out in a timely fashion.
Well, we'll look into it. I mean, one of the things that Governor Kathy Hochul and I feel very strongly about is that we want accountability in government. We want every dollar that of the $210 billion that money is being spent well. And we will look into issues like this, and I'll take a look at it, and we'll see what makes sense.
What doesn't make sense? $1.7 million for veterans causes, $0 dispersed. Jim Pratt helps run the Veterans Miracle Center in Albany. He gets donations out the door every day to veterans in need and wishes the state would do the same with these checkoff funds.
We've been waiting for this to happen for so long. And everybody keeps saying, why bother to check the box? Most of the guys laugh at it. Most of the veterans say, why bother? Because we're not seeing a dime. We're not seeing anything.
It's a similar situation at the State Office of Mental Health and the Mental Illness Anti-Stigma Fund. $263,000 in that fund, just $618 dispersed in the previous fiscal year. Now, I'm told $45,000 did go out in a grant to Erie County since then, but still, that's just a fraction of the overall fund. We tracked down the chair of the Assembly Mental Health Committee, and she was none too happy about this slow rollout of mental health funds.
It's pathetic that they don't get this money out to communities all over New York State. It's really badly needed.
There's also a question of transparency. The state agencies overseeing the individual funds are required by statute to provide reports to the controller, certain legislative committee chairs, and the public. It's a law with no teeth. Most are not doing that. Good luck trying to find those reports.
There's no real penalty attached to it other than shame, but unfortunately for some of these agencies, shame is not enough.
And the fear is that people will stop donating when they hear their money is gathering cobwebs in a state account somewhere. Just ask someone who does contribute every year.
Can I tell you something, Greg? I've actually decreased the amount that I do through it. Now, I still check off every box because I understand the purpose. But I do a little less than I've done before.
Perhaps the agencies in charge could use a helping hand in getting the funds into the right hands. If they put you in charge of this fund, could you get the money out to those who need it?
Oh, brother, I'd have a bus traveling around the area handing out the money. Absolutely.
And get this, in 2015, a state law was enacted that requires the funds to be dispersed the same year they're collected. The Division of Veterans Affairs has said it's waiting for the fund balances to reach a certain level before payouts are made. We will, of course, follow up with the Lieutenant Governor to see if pressure is put on state agencies to get this money out to those who need it. For nearly a year, New York State was not revealing the total number of COVID-19 deaths at nursing homes.
It's not like there's a back room anywhere here where we go back and we look at numbers and secret data.
But it turns out there was secret data. As we reported for months, when it came to COVID nursing home deaths, the state was only reporting the patients who died of COVID inside nursing homes. Patients who contracted COVID in a nursing home and then were sent to a hospital and died there were not part of the count. On August 3rd of last year, State Health Commissioner Dr. Howard Zucker told lawmakers counting deaths inside and out of the homes wasn't easy.
I know that you want that number, and I wish I could give you the number today, but I need to be sure it's absolutely accurate.
Dr. Zucker said he was worried about a possible double count of deaths.
We have to find out what happened, and we have to make changes, and quite frankly, it's long overdue.
Lawmakers have been worried about transparency.
Those families need to know what happened here, and we need the governor, we need everyone to be transparent about this. We need all this information. We need to look through it and make sure this never happens again.
Ever since the undercount started, we've wondered, how do other states do it? So we investigated, and New York State is the only state we can find that counts the way it does. Other states have had no problem keeping track of nursing home patients and avoiding that so-called double count. We started by checking with states that border New York. Vermont, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania all count deaths in and out of the homes together. The New Jersey DOH saying, quote, if someone lives in a nursing home but is transferred to a hospital and dies, the death is counted as a death in the nursing home where the individual resides. We broadened it out to other large states. It was the same for Texas, Ohio, and California. California saying the death toll includes those who died in the facility or after being transferred to a hospital. Every state that reports nursing home deaths includes both patients who died inside the nursing home and those who were sent to a hospital. Every single state.
Whatever happened, we need to know the real numbers. We need to know what happened so we can make changes. But the only way we can really make changes, safeguard these patients for any future pandemic, is to know what happened.
The deaths of nursing home patients in hospitals were reported, but as hospital deaths. That's why the nursing home numbers were so much lower up until a few weeks ago, when under intense pressure, the state of New York started counting the same way that every other state in the nation does. In this digital age, it's a throwback to the Stone Age. Law books. You can find them by the dozens in almost every New York State Assembly office.
Why should we go backwards? Why should we take steps back at this point?
But these aren't leftovers from a time gone by. These are brand new, purchased over and over again, year after year.
As the State Assembly, I think we need to look at getting up into the 2021s.
We've got the records obtained through a Freedom of Information Law request. The Assembly would often buy more than 70 copies of the same book and pay 30 grand, 40 grand, 43 grand a pop. Is anyone using these law books?
I'll be quite honest with you. I have a set in my district office in Schoharie, one here at the Capitol, and one in my Catskill office, and I've never looked at one of them.
And it's not just Republicans. The party in power says the same thing. Just ask Democrat Angelo Santa Barbara.
Let's forget about the law books and do it all online.
Everything is online now. There's LexisNexis, the legal service at the State Capitol Library, computers in every office, and right across the way here, the largest law library in the state of New York at the State Museum.
Well, I go to the computer or the iPad or my phone, for that matter, whenever I have to look up a bill.
The state legislature has been trying to go digital, no longer printing mountains of paper for every bill. And an assembly work group recommended 4 years ago that the purchase of law books be discontinued. But still, like a drunken sailor, the assembly keeps buying them.
People actually want to see things online because it's easier for them to access. It just makes sense. And at the end of the day, it saves money, which means it saves taxpayers money.
The total amount spent is staggering. Even after the work group said stop, Assembly leadership kept saying go. $626,000 spent on law books in 2018, $600 grand in 2019, back up to $611,000 in 2020. 3 years, nearly $2 million for something people from both parties say is not needed.
The pandemic has shown us how we can embrace this technology and actually use it quite effectively.
Are there things that you can think of that you could spend that money on for a much better cause?
Absolutely. That $600,000 could come in handy. Let's save that money.
Well, you go to your job, you expect the state lawmakers who work for you to show up for theirs, especially when you pay them $120,000 a year. But I've got the records right here, and that's not always the case. Empty chairs were the order of the day in 2020 as the New York State Assembly went virtual in early April. But here's the thing, lots of those chairs were empty even before the pandemic hit. How important is it to be there in the Capitol doing your job personally or virtually?
Well, we live in a representative democracy, and you can't have yourself represented if your elected official doesn't show up for work.
We have obtained the Assembly attendance records for 2020, and for some, attendance was anemic. Take the case of Democrat Robin Schimminger. 2020 was his 44th and final year in the Assembly. He wasn't running for re-election. A lame duck, and his attendance was lame. He missed 27 of the first 31 sessions. He did not show up at all for the entire month of January. He has a history of not being in Albany in January.
Historically, you've been around a long time. You know in that first week, nothing happens. I was not anticipating any activity here, and I did not make plans to attend.
Other absentee Assembly members, Carmen Arroyo missed 8 of the first 31 sessions for a 25% absentee rate. She has since left the Assembly. Al Sturpey missed 7, or 23% of the Albany sessions. Even though Assembly attendance is taken, there appear to be no repercussions for repeated absences.
I think it's important to be here, and that's why I'm here today.
Jake Ashby is the only local Assembly member on the Assembly Ethics Committee. What can be done to make sure that people show up and do their jobs?
Well, I think the leadership needs to take a hard look at the way that we're conducting things right now and maybe re-examine the rules.
The Assembly Minority Leader Brian Cole missed 7 of the 11 sessions in January after a New Year's Eve car crash that resulted in DWI charges and the loss of his leadership position. One other case that jumps out, that of Jamie Romeo. She finished out her second year in the Assembly by missing most of her second year. The governor appointed her to fill a vacancy as the Monroe County Clerk and said of her in a press release, she's a true public servant and forceful advocate for Monroe County. She left the Assembly on February 6 without doing much serving or advocating in Albany. She missed 10 of her 14 2020 sessions.
Well, there were some family issues that were going on in the earlier part of when we had session, for myself personally.
Any worry that your constituents weren't properly represented in Albany when you weren't here?
Well, I think that was always a concern, and ultimately when I did take the role to serve in a different capacity and during the pandemic, that was always a concern as well. But I think, lawmakers, just with everyone else, have personal responsibilities that they've got to attend to.
Matt Simpson of Warren County was just elected to the Assembly and has been coming every day this year. He was stunned when we told him about those who aren't in Albany every day.
That's amazing. I don't know why somebody would not want to be here and be part of this body and do their job.
It's been said half the job in politics is just showing up, an adage that perhaps should be hanging up somewhere in the halls of the Capitol. In the meantime, residents in parts of the state go without a voice in Albany for days and sometimes weeks on end. Is it fair to say the constituents in their districts have been shortchanged?
Well, they're certainly not being represented. That's why they elected these people to go to Albany, was to show up and represent their interests. Their interests were not represented.
And it should be noted that Assembly attendance records for 2020 only go through the first week of April. After that, the Assembly went virtual, and attendance records were not kept, or at least not saved, meaning you and I have virtually no idea who was and was not taking part.